The morning I bought that beach house, I dreamed of quiet sunsets and peace after a lifetime of giving. But when my daughter-in-law showed up with her friends, her parents, and even their dogs, she acted like my home was her vacation resort. I didn't yell. I smiled, made tea, and started documenting everything. By the time she realized what I was doing, it was already too late. The tide had turned in my favor. And believe me, that was only the beginning of what came next. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The morning air in Galveston carried that briny sweetness I'd been dreaming of for years. I sat on the porch of my new beach house, the wind chime made of tiny white shells whispering beside me. Every sound felt like a soft applause for what I'd finally done, retired, paid off every bill, and bought a place by the sea that was entirely mine. My name, Viola Merrick, was etched on the deed. No one else's. Inside, unopened boxes lined the hallway like polite guests waiting their turn. I took my time with each one, unpacking small pieces of my life, a chipped teacup, a faded family photo, my mother's quilt. For the first time in decades, silence was not loneliness, it was peace. By midday, my phone buzzed across the counter. A notification blinked from our family group chat. The name had changed. It now read, Our Beach House, Summer. I stared at it, my thumb frozen above the screen. Our? The deed had no hour. A moment later, my son Keegan called. "Hey, Mom," he said, cheerful in that distracted way of people who are already halfway to another thought. Maura and I were thinking it'd be easier if you took the smaller upstairs room, closer to the bathroom, you know. I smiled into the receiver even though my chest tightened. Easier for who? I asked. For everyone? He said quickly. Maura's parents might stay a few weeks, and the downstairs suite is larger. He trailed off when I didn't respond. I said something neutral, something polite, then hung up and stared at the waves outside the window. They rolled in endlessly, each one wiping the last away. By early afternoon, the house was no longer mine in spirit, only on paper. A convoy of cars arrived, engines humming like an invasion. Maura stepped out first, wearing oversized sunglasses and that bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind her came her parents, her sister, and two friends dragging suitcases. "Surprise!" she shouted, arms wide. "We made it earlier than expected." I opened the door before she could knock, though she hadn't planned to anyway. Bags thudded on the floor. Someone moved my armchair to make room for a cooler. Her father commented on the dated decor. Her mother suggested moving the dining table for better flow. I kept my tone even. "Welcome," I said. "Make yourselves comfortable." They did. In less than an hour, my quiet haven was transformed into a crowded rental property. The walls echoed with laughter that wasn't mine. I noticed little changes as the day went on. My mother's seashell arrangement replaced by a scented candle. My framed photo turned face down. My groceries swapped out for chips and soda. When I reached for the folder labeled Property Documents, it was missing. My heart ticked hard until I found it under a beach tote labeled Family Snacks. I dusted off the sand and placed it on top of the refrigerator, higher than any of them would look. That evening, when the house finally exhaled into a rare silence, I sat at the dining table with a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote in neat block letters, "Day's error, occupancy movement damages." Then, I tested the ring camera at the door, green light blinking steady. I whispered to myself, not every boundary needs a wall, some just need a record. As the sun lowered into the Gulf, Maura appeared with a clipboard. "We'll do a quick orientation," she said lightly. Just to go over house rules for everyone?" She smiled as if she were the owner, not the guest. I rinsed my glass, placed it on the counter, and murmured, "I'll bring one rule of my own." Her brows lifted. "Oh, what's that?" I dried my hands, turned to face her, and said softly, "You knock." Morning light slid through the sheer curtains, soft as breath. I came downstairs to find Maura standing in the living room, clipboard in hand, her voice already filling the space. "Okay, everyone, let's start our little orientation," she said brightly, as if she were hosting a corporate retreat. Arlene laughed. Ronald clapped once, and even Keegan gave a small nod of approval. Maura paced like a manager with something to prove. "We'll assign rooms and chores so things stay organized. I'll take the master downstairs with Keegan, since Mom prefers stairs. She'll be comfortable upstairs." She smiled in my direction, sweet and sharp. I didn't correct her. Instead, I sat quietly in my chair by the window, my coffee cooling beside me. The Ring camera blinked green from the shelf, a silent witness. Maura's voice carried on. "Ron and Arlene, you'll have the guest suite. My sister and her husband can share the upstairs office. Mom's old files are still there, right? They're archived," I said simply. She laughed lightly. "Perfect." Then, with a wink toward her mother, "We'll try not to break anything, right, Mom?" I smiled. "Just remember whose name is on the insurance." The room went still for a heartbeat before the chatter resumed. By noon, the so-called orientation was over. They left sticky notes labeling shelves, snacks, towel, group use, as if I had applied for communal living. When the last of them drifted to the deck, I walked into the kitchen. The sunlight gleamed across the refrigerator's blank white door. I opened my laptop, printed 2 sheets, HOA property rules and owner on record, V, Merrick. I taped them neatly to the fridge, aligning the edges like I'd done my entire accounting career. When I stepped back, they looked almost decorative. Arlene wandered in, squinting. "Oh, how cute," she said. "Like those inspirational kitchen signs." "Yes," I replied. "A little inspiration for clarity?" Keegan entered, saw the papers, and paused. His mouth twitched as if to speak, but he didn't. He poured himself water instead. Silence can do what words cannot. That evening, the table filled with chatter and the smell of seafood. Maura cooked with my pans, using my herbs, moving in rhythm as though she'd owned the kitchen for years. I ate sparingly, my fork gliding through the plate while my mind took notes. "To a family that makes every place feel like home." Maura toasted. Glasses clinked. I set mine down gently. "Family starts with respect," I said. The noise faded. Even the Ring camera light seemed to dim for a breath. Maura's smile stayed frozen, her eyes narrowing just a touch before she shifted to another topic. Later. The house exhaled into night. From my balcony, I watched the tide stretch and retreat, a soft hiss in the dark. I opened my notebook and wrote, Day 1, chores assigned by guest, house treated as public. Each word steadied me. The ocean wind caught my hair. I rehung the shell chime near my door. Its sound was quiet but certain, a reminder of whose space this was. At dawn, I found Keegan in the kitchen. He looked uneasy. "You're not upset, are you, Mom?" I smiled. "No, honey, I'm just learning my new house's rhythm." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Don't worry," I said, rinsing my cup. "Everything has a record now." The Ring camera blinked again, steady, loyal. By late morning, the phone rang. "Viola!" said a cheerful voice. It was Noreen from the HOA committee. "I drove by last night. Looks like you've got a full house. Just a reminder, We'll be doing occupancy checks this week." "Thank you, Noreen," I said, glancing toward the packed driveway. "Yes, I'll be ready for them." The first morning of summer felt like it belonged to me alone. I woke before the sun and opened the balcony doors to let in the ocean air. The breeze tasted faintly of salt and seaweed, honest, grounding smells that had nothing to do with anyone's expectations. My house creaked softly, settling into its own rhythm. I poured a cup of coffee and watched the light crawl across the water. For a brief moment, everything was exactly how I had imagined it, peace earned after years of labor. Then my phone vibrated on the counter. One message from Keegan, then another, then 8 in a row from Melissa, cheerful emojis. "We're on our way and hope you don't mind a little early start." I set the phone down and whispered into the quiet, "So it begins." By 7, the storm arrived. Cars crowded the driveway, engines idling, horns chirping as if to announce a parade. The laughter came first, sharp and careless, followed by the thud of car doors. I watched through the kitchen window as sand and flip-flops invaded my white stone walkway. Melissa led the charge, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf like she was hosting a show. "Let's unload here," she shouted behind her while her parents wrestled coolers and beach umbrellas out of the trunk, while her brother balanced a Bluetooth speaker on his shoulder. The bass line echoed against my porch. When I opened the door, I was invisible. Melissa swept past me with her usual brightness, kissing the air beside my cheek. "Oh, good morning, Eleanor. We figured it was fine to come early." Her mother, carrying a casserole dish, smiled like she was entering her own kitchen. "Where's the Wi-Fi password, dear?" her father asked before even setting his bags down. Each request, each step across the threshold, chipped away at the fragile shell of peace I'd built. Sand trailed across my pristine marble like fingerprints on glass. I stood still, one hand on the doorframe, watching as my home filled with voices that didn't pause to notice who actually lived there. I greeted them with the politeness expected of a Southern hostess. "Good morning, everyone," I said evenly, offering a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Melissa barely heard me, too busy assigning bedrooms. Her father was already inspecting the liquor cabinet, and her sister had claimed the couch, when one of the younger cousins looked up and asked, "Miss Eleanor, where should I put my shoes?" That title, Miss, struck me like a demotion. Not Mom, not Grandma, just Miss Eleanor, like I was staff. I answered gently, "Anywhere you'd like." While my thoughts lined themselves in quiet order, if they were turning my home into their stage, I would be the one taking notes behind the curtain. The first real blow came when I walked into my master bedroom. My robe, my soft gray robe, hung across an unfamiliar shoulder. Melissa's mother was smoothing out my comforter, and her father was setting his tablet on my nightstand. "We didn't want to crowd the kids," she said brightly. "Hope you don't mind. We'll only be here a few nights." I looked at the bed I had dreamed about for years, the place I'd told myself I'd finally rest. "Of course," I replied, voice calm, even kind. "Enjoy your stay." I took my small suitcase, climbed to the guest room, and closed the door softly behind me. Dignity, I reminded myself, has its own volume. It whispers when everyone else shouts. Upstairs, the air felt cooler. I sat at the desk by the window and opened a notebook. Day 1, I wrote. Arrival, 7:03. Unannounced. Actions observed. Total disregard for ownership. My handwriting steadied me. Each word felt like reclaiming territory. I detailed who had entered which room, who had used which dish, and the exact moment my bedroom was taken. By the time I set my pen down, my mind was sharper than it had been in years. "They've mistaken kindness for weakness," I murmured. Then I sent a brief message to my attorney. Sarah Chen might need you soon outside. Melissa's family lounged on the beach, spreading towels across the sand like new landowners. From my window, I watched them through the reflection of the glass, unseen. My house, my peace, my silence invaded. But the advantage of being underestimated is that no one notices when you start to plan. They thought I'd surrendered. In truth, I'd only begun my preparation. Late morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen island as I opened my laptop. The spreadsheet waited, columns of expenses, categories, and tiny notes from months of careful budgeting. My peace, it seemed, now needed protection by arithmetic. I called the bank, my voice measured and cordial. Yes, I'd like to place temporary merchant restrictions, I said, clicking through each line item on the screen. No alcohol, no catering, and no rental services over $200. The officer confirmed politely. All alerts will go directly to your phone. Mrs. Merrick. I smiled faintly. My fingertips brushed the edge of my coffee mug as I ended the call. The house hummed with distant laughter, oblivious. I didn't need confrontation. The numbers would do it for me. Quiet control is a language best spoken softly. By early afternoon, it began. I was rinsing strawberries in the sink when I heard the commotion. Maura's voice, high and sharp, carried through the kitchen. That's strange, it declined twice, she said, her phone screen glowing. Keegan reached for his card next, swiping for a delivery from some luxury grocer down the coast. Declined again. Ronald frowned, muttering about these digital banks never working right. I turned off the tap, wiped my hands, and said lightly, fraud filters. Maybe. Happens all the time. No one answered. I glanced at my phone, where alerts lined up neatly. Attempted purchase, liquor distributor. Attempted purchase, catering service. I smiled without showing teeth and returned to my berries. There was a certain satisfaction in watching excess fold in on itself, quietly. By mid-afternoon, another kind of notice appeared, this one not digital. A bright orange sheet fluttered on the front door, stamped with the HOA's seal. Courtesy inspection, 9 a.m. tomorrow. It read in tidy block letters, parking count. Occupancy check. Quiet hours. Arlene laughed as she passed by. Oh, we love rules, as long as they're for other people, she said. I peeled the paper from the door, smoothed it flat, and taped it to the refrigerator. Then I circled the time in red ink. We'll be ready, I said. The words hung in the kitchen like a calm promise. Maura's smile tightened. The kind you wear when realizing someone else is now playing the long game better than you. By late afternoon, the house quieted for the first time all day. I sat at the dining table, laptop open, the ocean muted behind closed windows. My fingers moved steadily across the keys. To all parties, this message serves as a formal notice that no individual besides myself is authorized to represent or speak on behalf of the property located at address. Any public implication of shared ownership or management must cease immediately. I CC'd the HOA and the property manager, attached a few screenshots from text messages, and pressed send. Then I poured tea, steady and unhurried. Paper may look fragile, but when words are right, it holds more power than a voice raised in anger. As the sun lowered over the gulf, Keegan found me on the deck. Mom, are you really doing all this? It feels extreme. I looked at him, the same boy I'd once taught to double-check his math before turning in a test. I'm documenting, I said simply. That's all. The wind picked up, fluttering the orange HOA sheet inside the kitchen. Each flick of the page sounded like a ticking clock. You know, I added, Keys, codes, deeds, those things aren't emotional. They're just recorded facts. He looked down, jaw tight. Maura lingered behind the sliding door, pretending not to listen. When the house finally settled into silence, I gathered the printed email, the notice, and my handwritten notes. I stacked them neatly on the table beside a new legal pad labeled in blue ink, Day 2, 8:30, a.m. prep. Beside it, I placed 2 pens and a small folder for receipts. Order. I thought didn't require noise, only intention. I straightened one chair at the head of the table and turned off the lights. From outside came the gentle crash of waves and the rhythmic clack of my wind chimes, steady as breath. At 9 sharp, someone besides me would be measuring who belonged where. The morning sun slipped through the linen curtains like an uninvited guest, gilding the edges of my quiet room. From below came laughter, the kind that didn't belong to peace. It was sharp, carefree, echoing through the kitchen I designed for solitude. I could hear Celine's voice rise above the others, cheerful and commanding, followed by the unmistakable sound of my son's low chuckle. I stood by the stairway, unseen, and watched Noah flipping pancakes for Celine's friends as if he were the host. The same boy who once called me every Sunday now barely looked my way. Plates clinked, mimosas fizzed. Someone turned on music. I wondered when my home had become their summer playground and when I'd stopped being the person they asked permission from. At the table, I tried to take my place quietly. Celine smiled, that slow, deliberate smile that always preceded an insult disguised as charm. "Oh, Noah," she said, her voice sweet as syrup. "Your mom's talking again about the renovation budget." Laughter. Amanda, one of Celine's friends, leaned in with her fork raised. "You're so lucky." Noah. Not many mothers can still host like this at her age. My throat tightened, but my face didn't move. I watched Noah's expression, waiting for something, a word, a glance, a sign of defense. Nothing came. He just smiled faintly, the way people do when they'd rather not choose sides. I cut my pancakes slowly, forcing each bite down like medicine. "Family," I said softly, "starts with respect." The laughter died. For a moment, the only sound was the scrape of cutlery. Then the conversation turned elsewhere, as if my words had been a small inconvenience in their morning entertainment. Later, I escaped upstairs, my heart beating in that calm, deliberate rhythm that comes just before anger crystallizes into something sharper. I reached for the key to my study, the room that held every document, every deed, every letter tied to this house. The key was gone. I checked the drawer, my jewelry box, the small porcelain dish beside my bed. Empty. Celine must have taken it. I pressed my palm to the cool brass doorknob and closed my eyes. That room wasn't just a study. It was proof of everything I'd worked for, the last fortress of my name on this house. Celine's plan was no longer subtle. She wanted permanence. I found Noah near the porch, his phone in hand, the sea breeze tossing his hair like when he was a boy. "Why is everyone still here?" I asked quietly. "It's been a week." He sighed, looking away. "They're just friends. Mom, you should rest." "Rest," I repeated. "Is that what you call it when someone changes the locks on your life?" His eyes darted away again, his shoulders tightening. "Don't start this now," he murmured. The words rehearsed. Not his own. I didn't cry, not even when I realized the truth, that Celine hadn't just taken over the house. She'd taken my son's voice, too. That evening, I walked down to the beach. The air carried the scent of salt and betrayal. I stood where the waves met the sand and whispered, this is still my home. The memory of my husband's will surfaced, his neat handwriting, his final assurance that as long as I lived, the house would bear my name. Somewhere inside that locked study was the document to prove it. The sun sank low, brushing gold across the water. The wind whipped at my gray hair, and I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not grief, but resolve. They think I'm powerless, I murmured to the horizon. Let's see how they handle proof. That night, I found the courage to face the locked door, and what I discovered changed everything. The first real evening at the beach house began like a promise. The air smelled of salt and hibiscus, and the soft Florida twilight painted the walls in gold and lavender. I sat by the open window with my cup of chamomile tea, watching the tide roll in, slow and certain. For the first time in years, I felt settled. No noise, no demands, just the gentle rhythm of waves against the sand, my own small proof that peace could exist. This house was my sanctuary, my last great purchase after decades of accounting for everyone but myself. I whispered, almost to the sea. You're mine now. Finally mine. Then came the vibration, a text, cutting through the calm. From my son, Daniel. We're coming by tonight. I smiled, but the next word froze me. We? I didn't have time to answer before the quiet cracked apart. Car doors slammed, laughter spilled across the driveway, echoing into the hallway. Through the blinds, I saw headlights sweep over the palm trees. Daniel stepped out first, carrying a case of beer. Bryn followed, all bright energy and command, trailed by 3 people I didn't know, one holding a Bluetooth speaker, another dragging a cooler through the sand. "Mom," Daniel called, his voice easy, like he was greeting a hostess. "Surprise!" I met them at the door with a smile I had to build from scratch. "Surprise indeed," I said softly. Within minutes, music thumped through the walls. Bryn was laughing, barefoot in my kitchen, arranging bottles across the counter like a bartender setting up her shift. Her friends unpacked snacks, beach towels, and something that smelled like shrimp and sunscreen. I stood by the sink, watching as they rearranged my house into theirs. By the time the sun disappeared, the living room was crowded with strangers taking selfies in front of my driftwood shelf. One girl, wearing a wide straw hat, looked around and asked, "So whose grandma owns this place?" Bryn didn't hesitate. "It's ours, technically," she said, smirking. They laughed. I didn't. I knelt to wipe up a spill near the sofa, red wine bleeding into the white rug, and caught sight of my own trembling hands. Hours later, when the laughter faded into background chatter, I passed by the open patio doors and heard Bryn's voice again, sharp and careless. She wouldn't even have this house if it weren't for Daniel's help. I mean, he practically financed half of it. The lie hit harder than the noise ever could. I stopped, my breath steady but shallow, and looked toward the stairway. I didn't correct her. I didn't shout. I just walked upstairs and closed the door. Inside my room, I opened the wooden box I'd brought from my old office. Years of papers, certificates, statements. I found the deed. My name alone, Margaret Halliday. No one else's. For a long while, I sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the embossed seal with my fingertip. "You can take over the music," I murmured, "but not my dignity." That night, under the faint hum of the party below, I wrote a short note in my diary. Bryn and Daniel, unannounced guests, claiming ownership. The house remains mine. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I reached the name Elaine Cooper, attorney. I pressed call, then stopped, thinking better of it. It was late. Tomorrow would be soon enough. I opened the blinds just enough to see the reflection of the moon on the waves. Their laughter drifted faintly through the night air, careless, confident, unaware. I smiled to myself, the kind that comes when pain sharpens into purpose. I knew that night something inside me had shifted, not broken, but awakened. Morning came like a confession. The sea outside was quiet, but the house was not. Empty bottles lined the counters. Sand streaked across the floorboards. Someone had left a half-eaten sandwich on the piano bench. The smell of beer and salt water clung to the air. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, the mop handle steady in my hands. Every sweep of the floor felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The sunlight slipped across the ocean, steady and unapologetic. Maybe peace isn't found in silence, I thought, wringing out the mop. Maybe it's fought for. By the time I finished, the others were still asleep, the aftermath of their victory. Daniel appeared first, shirt wrinkled, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Mom." I didn't look up. "You turned my home into a circus." Bryn followed him, still in her robe, scrolling through her phone like a queen bored of her subjects. "Our home," she corrected softly, smirking. "Don't forget the R part." I met her eyes. "You'll leave by tonight." Daniel frowned. "Mom, by tonight," I repeated, voice steady, not raised. The room froze in that fragile stillness where respect used to live. Daniel sighed, shaking his head, and left the kitchen. Bryn laughed quietly, a sound too sharp for morning. By noon, she was on her phone, pacing the porch. "Can you believe this?" she said to someone. "She's losing it. Says we can't even stay in her house." I watched through the window as she turned the story into sympathy, painting herself as the wronged one. Her friends texted back instantly. I saw her smirk as she typed more. Then, an alert buzzed on my own phone. Her voice played over a video. Some people can't handle sharing, even with family. The caption read, "Dealing with controlling parents isn't easy." The post was public and already liked. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel surprised. I opened my laptop, took screenshots, and archived the evidence. Then I deleted my own social accounts, every single one. Her noise would not reach me again. That afternoon, I called Elaine, my lawyer. This time, I didn't pretend it was about updating my will. "It's about protection," I said. Elaine listened, patient and deliberate. "Then here's what we do," she said. "We transfer the property into a private trust. You remain trustee and beneficiary. That way, no one can contest it, and no shared ownership can be implied." It took 30 minutes to draw up the papers. I printed, signed, and dated each page at the small wooden desk by the window. Outside, the waves crashed, slow and certain, like a gavel striking again and again. By evening, the house was quiet. I collected the last of the empty bottles, stacked the chairs, and folded the blankets they had left scattered across the couch. The scent of lemon cleaner replaced the beer. I caught my reflection in the window. Silver hair, tired eyes, but unbroken. "You've survived worse," I whispered. Then, with the same steadiness that used to balance budgets and raise a son, I locked the front door. The key felt warm in my hand. I threaded it onto a chain and hung it around my neck. By sunrise, I wasn't afraid of losing them anymore. They were already gone. The afternoon light stretched thin across the white curtains, carrying the scent of salt and lemon polish. My son called just as I set down my teacup. "Mom," he said, his voice rehearsed, "Bryn and I want to have dinner tonight. To clear the air." Peace. That word still made me flinch. I agreed because refusing would make me the villain again. But as I looked at the table I had once shared with real laughter, A thought slipped in like a whisper. Peace doesn't come on fancy plates. It comes with honesty. By 7, the house looked like a magazine spread. Candles flickered. Bryn wore pearls that didn't suit her age or her intentions. 2 guests arrived, friends of hers, not mine, and greeted me like I was the help. My son poured wine with the care of a man trying to balance 2 worlds. Bryn steered the conversation effortlessly. "It's been a hard few months," she said, sighing dramatically. Dealing with her moods hasn't been easy. Her tone was soft, sympathetic, performative. The table laughed lightly. My son didn't correct her. I smiled. "Funny," I said, ladling soup into her bowl. "Stories do change depending on who's telling them." The laughter stopped just long enough for the sound of the waves to fill the silence. Halfway through the meal, a knock broke the tension. I rose before anyone else. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Latham, my lawyer. His briefcase gleamed under the porch light. "Oh, what a surprise," I said smoothly. "You brought the papers I asked about." Bryn's fork froze midair. My son's glass paused at his lips. I ushered Mr. Latham in as though he were family. We returned to the table. Bryn tried to recover her smile. "Business tonight, Margaret?" she asked, her voice brittle. "Just clarity," I replied. Mr. Latham placed a manila folder beside my plate. I opened it slowly, revealing the new trust documents and the deed. My name printed clean and singular. "Since you've been so worried about my mental state," I said softly, "I thought it best to make sure everything was clear." No one spoke. The only sound was the tide pressing against the shore outside. "This home," I continued, "is now under a private trust. Any use of it without permission is trespassing. I'm sure you'll understand." Bryn's smile cracked like porcelain. My son's eyes darted to the lawyer, then back to me. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. For the first time in months, I stood from the table without trembling. I carried my plate to the sink, washed it quietly, and left them sitting in their own silence. Outside, the sea breeze wrapped around me like truth itself. The house behind me no longer felt invaded. It felt claimed. For the first time, I didn't tremble when I stood up from the table. Late afternoon sunlight filtered across the white porch railings, catching the edge of an orange sheet fluttering against my front door. The letters, "Chue Notice of Violation," glared brighter than the sunset itself. I read every clause, the way I once combed through balance sheets, overnight parking limits, noise restrictions, occupancy caps. Behind me, laughter drifted from inside. The in-laws were arguing over playlists, still pretending the house belonged to them. "Just paperwork," Ronald said when I stepped back inside. He waved a hand like shooing off a fly. "They always send those." I took a photo, time-stamped it, and saved it to my cloud folder labeled Evidence, Week 2. By the time the phone rang, the air smelled of salt and burnt coffee. I answered on speaker. "This is Michelle with Coastal Home Insurance," said a crisp voice. "We received an alert from the HOA and a neighbor complaint about large gatherings on your property." My eyes flicked to the kitchen table. Beer cans, a cooler. Bryn's beach towels. Michelle continued. "Your current coverage doesn't include event liability. If the occupancy issue continues, your policy could be temporarily suspended." "I understand," I said evenly. "I'm taking corrective action." I asked her to email confirmation of that warning. She agreed. I printed it 5 minutes later and placed it next to the orange notice on the fridge. The paper corners fluttered with the air conditioning, 2 witnesses pinned in plain sight. From the hallway, Bryn whispered, "What was that?" "Insurance," I replied, wiping the counter. They like to stay informed. Dusk fell heavy and pink. From the front window, I watched one of the cousins stroll out, pluck the notice off the door, and crumple it like trash. A sharp ping from my phone followed. Ring alert. Poster removed. I replayed the clip twice. The camera caught everything: the hand, the license plate, the smirk. Within minutes, I retaped a new copy on the same spot. Then I sat at my desk, attached the footage, and sent it to the HOA and property manager, CCing my lawyer. Subject line: tamper evidence attached. In the living room, the chatter dimmed. The music stopped. The printer hummed. I had no need to raise my voice. Paper spoke louder than pride. That night, the neighborhood joined in. Someone had filmed snippets all week: arrivals, noise, and finally a quiet shot of me watering my hibiscus at sunrise. The video appeared on our community Facebook group. Reminder: this is Viola's home. Please respect our block. The comments rolled in. She's been gracious. Enough is enough. Glad someone said it. I took screenshots of everyone. By the time I checked Bryn's Our Beach House post, the comments had turned against her. She disabled them silently, like pulling a curtain over a broken window. Near midnight, I sat alone at the dining table. The surf murmured through the cracked window. My laptop screen glowed pale blue as I assembled the final file: photos, the insurer's email, the tamper clip, the neighbor's post, one tidy PDF titled Pattern of Misuse. I drafted a brief note: to whom it may concern. Attached are records documenting ongoing violations and misrepresentation at my property. All events occurred between May 14th and May 19th. I request acknowledgement of receipt and appropriate follow-up. I scheduled it to send at 7:45 then shut the lid. The orange notice on the fridge caught the last bit of moonlight, flickering like a warning beacon. When a neighborhood starts speaking, even the tides listen. At 7:45, My inbox blinked awake before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. 4 replies stacked neatly. Hey, property manager, insurer, attorney. Each one a small bell of consequence. The HOA confirmed an inspection summary. The property manager offered support in enforcing compliance. The insurer logged an incident notice for misuse. My attorney's subject line read, "Ready to formalize." I printed every response, lined them under my brass compass paperweight, and let the hum of the printer fill the kitchen like a hymn. By 9, the house stirred, the sound of running water, the shuffle of feet, the faint slam of a door. I set 4 glasses of water on the dining table, aligned the pens, and placed sticky flags where the signatures would land. On the fridge, the orange HOA notice sat centered, next to the insurer's bold header. My message to Keegan and Maura was short: 11:30 M. Meet-in. Attendance required. Then I called Shanda Lowe, a mobile notary I'd used once before for a property refinance. Arrive at 11:25 sharp, I told her. Outside, the wind chime flicked steady. Tick, pause, tick, a metronome of resolve. When they came downstairs, their faces carried the stiffness of people who'd slept badly. Mom, what's this about? Keegan asked. I gestured toward the papers. Facts, I said simply. The cease misrepresentation email. The HOA's violation log. The insurer's compliance note. Maura tried to soften her tone. We can talk this out as family. But I stayed with the rhythm of documentation. Dates, times, witnesses. Her voice dimmed. His shoulders sagged. The silence that followed was clean, almost merciful. A knock came at exactly 11:25. Shanda stood there, smiling, leather case in hand. Morning, Mrs. Merrick. She laid out her notary kit with quiet precision. The air shifted. I slid 2 documents forward: refund and damages acknowledgement and no contact and access revocation. She verified IDs, spoke the attestation aloud, her pen moving like a gavel without sound. Keegan's fingers tapped against the table. Maura's jaw tightened. Shanda stamped the first page. The embossed seal sank into the paper with a faint clack. Final and irreversible. Keegan hesitated. "Mom, this feels extreme." "No," I said, voice even. "It feels necessary." Maura whispered something sharp, but the notary kept her gaze fixed. Pen ready. I continued, calm as tidewater. "Refuse if you'd like. Council proceeds this afternoon, and both the HOA and insurer are already informed." Chairs scraped. Their signatures landed on the lines, hesitant strokes of surrender. Another clack, another seal. The sound echoed small but final, like a door locking from the inside. When it was done, Shanda handed me the folder, neatly stamped, airtight, copies for each party. I labeled mine Access Revoked, 1058A May. Their keys and fobs lay on the counter beside untouched glasses of water. I watched them wheel their suitcases down the walkway without speeches. The house seemed to inhale again, walls settling, the air lighter. I carried the folder to the deck. The Gulf shimmered under late morning sun. My mother's seashell chime whispered above me, soft and steady. I didn't feel triumph, only balance restored. The sea smelled like order and freedom. The morning light slid across the kitchen tiles like a gentle tide, touching the corners of my clean, quiet home. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a song. The only sound was the wind chime outside, its soft glass notes mixing with the hum of the waves. Through the window, I saw a young couple carrying groceries to the porch. They moved with the kind of care people reserve for borrowed things. The woman knocked lightly and smiled. "Mrs. Merrick, we'll treat your home like it's ours." I smiled back. "It's yours for the season." Their laughter trailed down the steps, small and sincere. No shouting, no arguments, just life, the way it was meant to sound. The sea breeze moved through the open door, lifting the scent of salt and lemon polish. My sanctuary was breathing again. By late morning, I sat at the table with my notebook open. Gannon Pike, my accountant, was on speaker. "Your first rental payment cleared," he said cheerfully. "Insurance reinstated. HOA settled. Property manager onboarded. You're not just fine, you're thriving." I traced the ink lines of my budget, the neat columns that once felt like battle plans. Now they look like balance. "Funny," I said. "My son used to call me outdated." Gannon chuckled. Maybe he'll update his definition of success. Out the window, the lighthouse across the bay flashed its pale light once, steady, deliberate. A reminder. Safety doesn't come from locking doors. It comes from learning which ones to open. That evening, Noreen Quinn arrived with a steaming pot of gumbo and her usual twinkle of mischief. "Thought you might enjoy dinner with someone who doesn't break your dishes," she said. We ate on the porch, the sunset spilling gold across the horizon. "It's strange," I told her. "When a house stops being loud, you start hearing yourself again." Noreen nodded, sipping her tea. Peace has its own volume. It's just harder to notice until you've lost it. We laughed about HOA politics and noisy neighbors, like women who'd survived storms and learned to dance afterward. When she left, she hugged me a little longer than usual. "You did it, Vi," she whispered. "You got your life back." Later that night, my email pinged. The subject line read, "I'm sorry. Mom." Keegan's words were short and halting. "I see now what I did. I'll respect your space. I hope you're okay. I sat for a moment, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Then I typed, "That's all I asked." No paragraphs, no explanations, just peace. The kind that comes from releasing something without resentment. The glow of the screen faded into the dusk, soft and forgiving. The moon was already high when I walked barefoot onto the deck. The boards were still warm from the sun, fading slowly into the night's cool breath. Inside, the folder labeled legal now sat in a drawer marked archive, not forgotten, but finished. I lit a small candle near the window. The flame flickered once, steadying itself, and I whispered, "This time, the quiet belongs to me." Outside, the waves answered, rhythmic and faithful. I opened my journal to a fresh page and wrote the first line of my next chapter, not about loss or betrayal, but about grace. When you stop needing the noise, you finally hear what life's been trying to tell you. The sunrise poured itself across the gulf like warm honey, touching every window, every shell, every quiet inch of this house that once knew chaos. I brewed my morning coffee and opened the ledger labeled After. The pages were full. Rental records, maintenance schedules, proof that calm can be built like anything else, deliberately. From the porch, I heard the gentle murmur of the new tenants, laughter, respectful, low. The house didn't flinch anymore. Its walls had learned stillness. And so had I. "We did it," I whispered, to the house, to the tide, to the woman I used to be, me. By mid-morning, I scrolled through my emails. The HOA chair had written, "We'd love for you to serve on our advisory panel. Your experience with property management and dispute resolution would be valuable." I smiled. That was their polite way of saying I'd gone from problem to example. Next came a message from the property manager. "Your summer calendar is fully booked. Renters reviewed as quiet and reliable." The system I built was working. Then a text from Keegan. I mailed the reimbursement we owed. "No more surprises. I'm working on myself." I typed back, "Thank you. Respect my boundary. And we'll be fine." This time, I hit send without trembling. That afternoon brought something unexpected, a request. The renters, a quiet couple, knocked softly on my door. "We're renewing our vows this evening," the wife said. 10 people, just family. Would it be all right to hold it here, on the sand? They offered an additional fee. I waved my hand. "No charge," I said, smiling. "But the same rules apply. Time, volume, trash, and respect." Noreen came over with flowers from her yard. I loaned my grandmother's quilt to drape over the arch they built near the dune line. The scene unfolded like a second chance, not at family, but at community. For once, people were using this place as it was meant to be, with care. Just before sunset, I heard footsteps on the porch, measured, hesitant. It was Keegan. He texted first, asking permission to stop by. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He held out a small cashier's check and my old spare key. "For the damages," he said, "and to make things right." I accepted both and placed them on the entry table. "From here on," I said, "requests in writing, respect for the rules. You're still my son, but my home is mine." He nodded. We didn't hug, and that was fine. Some peace doesn't need touch, it just needs clarity. Later, I called my attorney. "Let's proceed with the foundation," I told her. We drafted the paperwork for the Merrick Quiet Power Fund, directing part of my rental income toward legal aid for elderly homeowners, women like me, who once mistook patience for power. I emailed Gannon, my accountant. Standing order established. Folder title, Legacy, active. It wasn't revenge. It was continuity. the kind that turns hurt into instruction and home into purpose. The evening came soft and golden. On the beach, 10 chairs faced the horizon. The couple renewed their vows beneath the arch, gulls circling above like blessings. Noreen squeezed my hand and whispered, "This place feels healed," someone asked who designed the ceremony space. I smiled. A woman who finally remembered her own name. After the last photograph, I folded my grandmother's quilt along its worn creases and carried it inside. The house smelled of lemon oil and salt air, clean, grounded, alive. At my desk, I placed 3 folders in a drawer: legal, archive, home, active, legacy, active. Then I wrote the last line in my journal. Quiet is not what's left when the noise leaves. Quiet is what happens when you choose yourself. I set down the pen, listened to the wind chimes, and let the sea close the day with its eternal rhythm, steady, sure, and mine. If there's one truth I've learned from this story, it's this. Peace doesn't come from silence, it comes from courage. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's clarity. So many women my age were taught to hold families together by bending, apologizing, and shrinking. But sometimes, loving your family means teaching them how to treat you with respect. When I finally stopped asking for understanding and started defining what I would no longer accept, the quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was freedom. And if you've ever been made to feel small in your own home, your own life, know this: you have the right to peace, too. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to reclaim your own space or peace of mind? Tell me in the comments, type 1, if you've ever had to stand your ground, or share where you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because our stories, your stories, are what keep this channel alive.